Warren Buffett just restructured his $200 billion will. And it's not what you think. While it looks like he's cutting his kids out of money, he's actually giving them more control than ever before. His children now have to unanimously agree on every single donation, which sounds reasonable until you realize what this actually does to their psychology. And Buffett isn't alone. Elon Musk has 13 kids, but they only inherit his Tesla and SpaceX shares if they prove they think exactly like him. Bill Gates is giving away his entire fortune in just 20 years. But the timing isn't generous, it's strategic. And Oprah has created tax structures that will channel her personality into charitable decisions for centuries. These billionaires aren't preparing to die. They're engineering systems to control society from beyond the grave. And the psychology behind it is darker than you realize. Here's exactly how they're doing it, and why every family, rich or not, needs to understand these strategies. Warren Buffett's consensus-building legacy strategy. Warren Buffett recently announced that when he dies, virtually all of his $200 billion fortune will go into a charitable trust controlled by his 3 children. But here's the sophisticated part. They must reach unanimous agreement on every single decision, every donation, every cause they support. Every strategic direction requires all 3 to say yes. But here's what's really strategic about this approach. Buffett isn't just giving them money. He's engineering how they'll think about problems for decades to come. When you require unanimous consent, you create what decision theorists call a conservative bias. Only the safest, most carefully considered decisions get approved. Impulsive choices become nearly impossible. Risk-taking gets filtered out. The decision-making style becomes inherently cautious and deliberative, exactly like Buffett's own approach. But there's another layer here. His children have to convince each other using logic, evidence, and reasoning that would satisfy someone with Buffett's analytical mindset. They can't just follow their passions or intuitions. They have to build cases that would meet their father's standards of rational evaluation. Even more strategically, Buffett had his children read and approve the will before he signed it. This creates what psychologists call commitment consistency. They can't later claim the system is unfair because they participated in creating it. This isn't manipulation in a negative sense. It's sophisticated behavioral design. Buffett has created a system that preserves his decision-making methodology while giving his children genuine agency within that framework. The result? Hundreds of billions in charitable giving that will follow Buffett's philosophical approach to problem-solving, potentially for generations. His cautious, evidence-based, long-term thinking becomes embedded in how this enormous pool of resources gets deployed. Elon Musk's performance-based succession framework. Elon Musk has taken a completely different approach with his 13 children. Rather than traditional inheritance, he's implementing what he calls a merit-based system, where his children only gain control of his Tesla and SpaceX holdings if they demonstrate commitment to continuing his vision of advancing human civilization. From a family business perspective, this makes sense. You want capable leadership, not just genetic succession. But the psychological implications are profound. Musk isn't just making inheritance conditional on being successful. He's making it conditional on adopting his specific worldview, values, and definition of meaningful work. His children will spend their entire lives knowing that their financial security depends on proving they think like their father. This creates what psychologists call conditional self-worth. These children will spend their entire lives knowing that their financial security depends on proving they think like their father. But here's what's fascinating. Musk genuinely believes this is beneficial. From his perspective, he's not imposing arbitrary conditions. He's ensuring that resources go toward what he considers genuinely important work. The psychological pressure on his children is, in his view, similar to the pressure any leader faces to prove their competence. The broader implication: Musk's vision of human expansion to Mars, sustainable energy, and artificial intelligence development will be supported by massive resources controlled by people who have spent their lives learning to think like him. His strategic priorities become embedded in the next generation's decision-making. Bill Gates's accelerated impact strategy. Bill Gates has announced perhaps the most time-sensitive approach of all: He plans to give away virtually his entire $200 billion fortune within the next 20 years, then shut down the Gates Foundation completely by 2045. Most people interpret this as ultimate generosity. But from a strategic influence perspective, this is brilliantly calculated. Gates isn't creating a foundation that might drift from his vision over decades. He's ensuring concentrated impact during a compressed timeline when his ideas are still current and his decision-making authority is unquestioned. Rather than creating institutions that might drift from his vision over time, Gates is opting for concentrated impact, while his ideas are still current and his authority unquestioned. This creates urgency throughout the entire global development sector. Governments, nonprofits, universities, and researchers all have to organize around his timeline and priorities. Instead of decades of gradual influence, he's creating a concentrated burst of impact that follows his strategic framework. The Gates Foundation has already influenced global health policy in ways that will persist for generations. Vaccination programs, malaria prevention strategies, educational technology initiatives. These bear the imprint of Gates's analytical approach and will continue shaping how we address these challenges long after 2045. By creating artificial scarcity around his philanthropy, limited time, specific focuses, Gates ensures maximum attention and adoption of his approaches during the crucial implementation phase. Oprah's institutional immortality system. Oprah has constructed one of the most sophisticated wealth preservation and influence systems using charitable remainder trusts, donor-advised funds, and educational institution endowments. These structures allow her to avoid estate taxes while creating perpetual institutions that operate according to her values and worldview. What makes this particularly strategic is the positioning. Because Oprah doesn't have children, her charitable focus appears purely altruistic. But these aren't simple donations. They're carefully structured systems that will channel her perspectives on education, media, spiritual development, and social justice for potentially centuries. Every scholarship program, every educational initiative, every media project funded through these structures will be evaluated against criteria designed to reflect Oprah's values and vision. Her approach to empowerment, storytelling, and personal development becomes embedded in institutional decision-making processes. The genius is in the tax optimization combined with values preservation. Rather than paying estate taxes that would reduce her influence, she's creating tax-advantaged structures that maximize the resources available to continue her work, while ensuring that work follows her philosophical framework. This represents a sophisticated understanding that true wealth isn't just money. It's the ability to shape how resources get deployed toward causes and approaches you believe in. The Dynasty Trust Revolution, engineering perpetual influence. Here's where the legal innovation gets truly remarkable. Certain states allow what are called dynasty trusts that can last for centuries. Alaska allows them for 1,000 years. Delaware and several other states allow them in perpetuity. These aren't just financial instruments. They're sophisticated governance systems that embed individual decision-making frameworks into legal structures that outlast biological life by generations. Here's how they work. The trust founder creates detailed guidelines, value statements, and decision-making criteria. Future distributions, investment choices, and family conflicts get resolved by trustees who are legally bound to ask, what would the founder have wanted? The founder's psychology becomes algorithmic. The wealthiest families in America have used these structures to grow their assets by over 1,000% since 1983, far outpacing broader economic growth. This isn't accidental. It's the result of sophisticated systems that concentrate and perpetuate both wealth and influence across generations. But the psychological implications are profound. Descendants live within frameworks created by people who died decades or centuries ago. Their choices get filtered through dead individuals' preferences, values, and biases. From a historical perspective, this represents something unprecedented. Previous generations of wealthy families saw their influence dilute over time as descendants made their own choices and developed their own priorities. Today's ultra-wealthy, are engineering systems specifically designed to prevent that dilution. The buy, borrow, die wealth immortality strategy. Most ultra-wealthy individuals never sell their appreciating assets during their lifetime. Instead, they use what's called the buy, borrow, die strategy, which has profound implications for how wealth transfers across generations. Here's the mechanics. Buy, acquire appreciating assets, stocks, real estate, businesses. Borrow, use those assets as collateral for loans to fund lifestyle expenses. Die, pass assets to heirs with a stepped-up basis, eliminating all capital gains taxes. Think of this like a magic trick with money. Imagine you bought stock for $1,000 that's now worth $100,000. If you sell it, you owe taxes on that $99,000 gain. But instead of selling, you go to a bank and say, "Lend me $50,000 using this stock as collateral." The bank gives you $50,000 in cash, tax-free, because it's a loan, not income. You live off that money. When you die, your heirs inherit the stock at its current $100,000 value, and the $99,000 in capital gains just disappears forever. According to IRS data, this strategy allows wealthy families to avoid billions in taxes annually while maintaining access to their wealth throughout their lifetimes. But the psychological implications go deeper than tax avoidance. This strategy creates what we might call immortal money, wealth that compounds across generations without ever being diminished by taxation or forced liquidation. The assets become like organisms designed to grow perpetually while providing resources to their owners. This isn't new conceptually. Benjamin Franklin used versions of this approach. The Rothschild family built their banking empire on similar principles. What's new is the scale, sophistication, and legal frameworks that make it more powerful than ever. The psychological impact on heirs, programming versus development. Research into ultra-high net worth family dynamics reveals some concerning patterns. Studies by wealth psychology researchers show that children in these elaborate control systems often struggle with identity formation and autonomous decision-making. When inheritance is conditional on thinking like a deceased founder, or when every financial decision requires unanimous consent that favors conservative choices, children can develop what researchers call proxy identity syndrome. They become skilled at channeling someone else's preferences rather than developing their own authentic interests and values. This isn't necessarily intentional psychological harm. Most wealthy parents genuinely believe they're teaching good values and decision-making skills, but the unintended consequence can be children who struggle to distinguish between their own preferences and the frameworks they've been trained to apply. Elon Musk's merit-based approach, while seemingly fair, creates particular pressure because worth becomes tied to meeting someone else's definition of meaningful contribution. His children will spend their lives proving they deserve their inheritance according to their father's criteria for success. Warren Buffett's unanimous consent requirement may prevent impulsive decisions, but it also makes it nearly impossible for his children to pursue philanthropic approaches that differ significantly from his own, even if they develop different insights or priorities based on changing circumstances. The broader question becomes, at what point does guidance become control? When does preserving wisdom become constraining development? Understanding dead-hand control. In modern context, legal scholars use the term dead-hand control to describe the ability to control property and people after death. But what today's billionaires have created goes far beyond traditional dead-hand control. Previous generations might have controlled how money got spent or which family members received what amounts. Today's systems control how people think about problems, make decisions, and define their values. Warren Buffett's structural requirements don't just affect what his children do with money, they shape how they approach decision-making itself. His analytical, evidence-based methodology becomes embedded in every choice they make about philanthropy. Bill Gates' compressed timeline doesn't just determine when money gets distributed, it ensures his strategic frameworks for addressing global challenges remain undiluted and unchallenged during the crucial implementation phase. This represents a new category of influence that extends beyond financial control into psychological and ideological territory. These aren't just estate plans, they're consciousness preservation systems, the societal impact, private governance of public issues. Here's what makes this particularly significant for society. When individuals can project their personalities and decision-making frameworks into institutions that influence education, healthcare, criminal justice, and economic policy for centuries, we're essentially creating private governance systems that operate alongside democratic institutions. The Gates Foundation alone has influenced global health policy, educational technology adoption, and poverty relief strategies in ways that affect millions of people. Now imagine that influence continuing for centuries, guided by systems designed to preserve Bill Gates' specific approaches to these challenges. The Buffett children will eventually control hundreds of billions in charitable giving, but every decision they make will be filtered through structures designed to preserve their father's psychological approach to evaluating effectiveness and impact. This isn't necessarily problematic. Many of these individuals have demonstrated remarkable insight and judgment, but it does represent a form of governance that operates outside traditional, democratic accountability mechanisms. When private individuals can create perpetual institutions that shape public policy and social outcomes for centuries, we need to understand how these systems work and what their long-term implications might be. The practical lessons for non-billionaires. While most of us don't have billions to transfer, the underlying principles reveal important insights about wealth transfer, family governance, and values preservation that apply at any scale. Values-based planning. Rather than just thinking about who gets what amounts, consider how to preserve and transfer the wisdom, values, and decision-making frameworks that created the wealth in the first place. Governance structures. Even modest estates can benefit from clear decision-making frameworks that help families work together effectively and resolve conflicts constructively. Education and preparation. The billionaires we've studied invest enormous resources in preparing their heirs to handle responsibility. This principle scales, preparing family members to handle whatever level of responsibility they'll inherit. Long-term thinking. The ultra-wealthy think in decades and centuries. Even modest wealth benefits from multi-generational perspective and planning. Tax optimization. While most people can't access dynasty trusts, basic tax planning strategies like proper beneficiary designations, retirement account management, and estate tax minimization apply at all wealth levels. The fundamental challenge remains the same, whether you're managing thousands or billions. How do you preserve and transfer not just money, but wisdom, values, and positive impact across generations? Looking forward, the new landscape of power and influence. We're likely still in the early stages of this trend. As legal frameworks become more sophisticated and technology creates new possibilities for preserving decision-making systems, these approaches will become even more powerful. The combination of artificial intelligence and advanced legal structures might eventually allow for even more precise preservation of individual decision-making frameworks. Systems that can simulate how deceased founders would approach entirely new situations. Understanding the new landscape of power and influence. What we're witnessing represents perhaps the most sophisticated attempt in human history to transcend the traditional limitations of individual mortality. These billionaires aren't just planning for death. They're engineering systems designed to make their consciousness and influence effectively immortal through legal, financial, and institutional frameworks. Warren Buffett's unanimous consent requirements, Elon Musk's merit-based inheritance systems, Bill Gates's accelerated philanthropy timeline, Oprah's charitable trust structures. These represent different approaches to the same fundamental challenge: how to preserve individual decision-making frameworks across multiple generations. The implications extend far beyond family wealth management. We're seeing the emergence of private governance systems that will influence education, healthcare, scientific research, and social policy for potentially centuries. This isn't necessarily positive or negative. It depends on the wisdom of the individuals creating these systems and the appropriateness of the governance frameworks they design. But understanding how these systems work is crucial for anyone who wants to understand how power and influence really operate in our society. Whether you're managing thousands or billions, the fundamental insight remains. True wealth isn't just about money. It's about the ability to create positive impact that extends beyond your own lifetime. The ultra-wealthy have simply developed more sophisticated methods for engineering that extension. The question for the rest of us is whether we can learn from their approaches while developing our own methods for preserving and transferring wisdom, values, and positive impact across generations. What aspects of this analysis surprised you most, and how might these insights apply to your own approach to family governance and wealth transfer, regardless of the scale involved? If this analysis opened your eyes to dynamics you hadn't considered before, drop a comment below sharing which billionaire's strategy shocked you the most. Buffett's cautious consensus, Musk's merit-based succession, Gates's accelerated giving, or Oprah's institutional immortality. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can stay updated with future videos in the Psychology of Money series. Understanding these systems is the first step toward making informed decisions about your own financial future and the kind of society we want to create.